between Perm Secretary and I, we can give you a sort of feel for that. I don't know if this takes us into the reform territory, but you're quite right. I mean, part of the most important elements of the reform, I mean, we've got 4 budget holders instead of 10. We've got 1 investment budget.
Because I know we're short of time.
And if you look at the budget of the NAD Group, for instance, which holds that investment budget, we've actually created, as part of the reforms now, a FTSE 100 scale company just within that NAD Group.
Just what would the percentages be across those 3?
I'm very happy to share that with you. I think the Invest budget is essentially very close to the CDEL budget, which this year is £23.2 billion of £62.2 billion. The Readiness and Run budget and the Operations budget are very close to the RDEL budget, which is £38.9 billion. But let me get you a note on the precise.
I think that would be very good.
That's is the Run, Readiness and the Operate.
So they come together.
And the Operate come together. Is broadly the position.
And just super quickly,
that's all public information.
Is that going to be different in 12 months' time, 24 months' time, 5 years' time? Do we see that?
Well, we've not
shifting?
made. While we do have obviously a settlement for CDEL and RDEL, the splits within the budget are decisions that we will need to make in the usual way alongside the investment plan. We do have some of those publicly information on how our CDEL budget in particular is rising. We've alluded to some of the numbers. It is scheduled to rise to £31.5 billion by 2028-29.
So that shift is going to move from less investment, more operations.
More invest, more the proportionally, CDEL is a greater proportion of the budget on the settlement that the department has.
Ian Rowe.
Secretary of State, could I ask regarding the MOD budget, have you announced any in-year savings? And if so, are you diverting money away from our people at the expense of big, shiny capabilities? And I'm talking about medical services, especially because we all focus on programmes, Typhoon, GCAP, AUKUS, but I never hear anything said about the medical services within the armed forces. And from our experience on some of the inquiries I'm picking up, that actually we're not investing enough in the medical capabilities within our own armed forces. So could you just tell us what your plans are there?
The answer to your question, short answer, is no and no. The budget this year is bigger, £6 billion bigger than it was last year, so we're spending more. But of course, as you'd expect, as the public would expect, we're trying to make sure that we spend that well, that it reflects the priorities and rising pressures on defence at the moment. And where we can, we're giving the priority to the sort of operational demands and options that are being required of defence. That's increased commitment, preparing for what we hope will be a peace in Ukraine. It's potential options for stepping up action on shadow shipping. It is continuing, as you've seen in the
medical services in particular.
I'm going to ask General Naismith perhaps to add on. But in terms of no to savings. We're making decisions about controlling and managing our budgets, as you would expect us to do within the year, and no to prioritising shiny big platforms over the operations and the concerns to put the people, the men and women in uniform, at the heart of our defence plans.
Right, brilliant. Thank you. Oh, General, just very briefly on that,
I was just going to do
General.
reinforcing fires in terms of under defence reform. I'm now the Armed Forces people person. I think I said that at the last time we met. And whilst we go through some of our managing the in-year budget, the Secretary of State holds us to account very strongly around protecting some of our people measures, as you might have described them, for which I'm very grateful as the Armed Forces people person.
Thank you very much. I've got Emma Liu very briefly, and then also very briefly Lincoln Job.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one from me, and it might seem a bit obvious, but since the government accepted all 62 of the recommendations in the SDR, and that included 12 new F-35As, the 12 SSN AUKUS nuclear subs, 6 munitions factories, 6 billion in munitions procurement, 7,000 long-range missiles, and 1 billion for homeland air defence. Will they all be in the defence investment plan or not?
They will be part of what we plan to deliver over the next decade, which is, of course, the period of the SDR.
So they'll be in the defence investment plan?
So they will be part of what we look to pursue over the next decade, because we want to implement those parts of the SDR.
Is the money there for all of those things, Secretary of State? Because that's a lot of costly items.
So when you look at the 270 billion we'll be spending in this Parliament, the fact we'll hit 3% in the next Parliament, that we've made a commitment like the other 31 allies as members of NATO to 3.5% on defence by 2035. This gives us that certain decade of rising defence spending, which I talked about to Ms Scroggum earlier on, and it allows us to plan within that for the way that we pace and prioritise the investments that we make.
I think what I'm trying to pin you down on, Secretary of State, and I know this, is that you accepted those recommendations, so are they going to happen? Are those what I've read, the list of things that I've just read out there, are they going to happen?
Well, they're not all going to happen in the first year. They can't all happen in the first year. But the SDR was a vision and essentially an outlined strategic plan for the next decade, and that's what we will pursue.
Right, brilliant. I do want to move on to defence reform with Mike Martin after this very quick supplementary from Lincoln Job.
Very quick one. General, whose job is it to protect the moral component of fighting power?
So it's the service chiefs through the chief, all of the service chiefs and Commander CSOC as part of the Chiefs Committee.
Thank you. Brilliant. All right, on to defence reform then with Mike Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Secretary of State, what does success look like for defence reform? We're probably a year, 18 months into it now.
Well, first of all, it's a Parliament-long programme. I can tell you what progress looks like after 18 months. A Chief of the Defence Staff that now commands the service chiefs for the first time. A newly defined, powerful and appointed National Armaments Director for the first time in this country. A new military strategic headquarters that is up and running. A new leadership group, the Quad Leaders, that is playing such an important part alongside ministers in the defence investment planning process. A NAD group with a £20 billion budget that's as big as a number of FTSE 100 companies. A reduced number of budget holders, which we touched on a moment ago. Instead of having 10 different budget holders making disparate defence investment decisions in different parts of defence, 4 budget holders corresponding with the Quad. And to give you an example of the way we're consolidating what was fragmentation and duplication, what loosely could be described as the different programs and portfolios that were about stepping up our ability to be more lethal, weaponry systems, torpedoes, long range. Instead of having 27 of those, all pursued separately, that's consolidated in one.
And what does the end of the process look like?
The end of
the defence reform.
You know, in a way, reform.
When you say you're done and it's achieved.
Reform never
done.
ends.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll bring General Naismith in and the Permanent Secretary in a moment, because they can talk about how what we do now and how we do it is different to 18 months ago, particularly General Naismith. But for me, the purpose of this is that we have a defence system that is better able, more quickly, to get the technology and equipment into the hands of our warfighters.
Can you give some specific examples?
Yes, and General Naismith can do
Yes,
that.
so perhaps if I can bring to life how it feels different today to how it felt about 12 months ago. From my perspective in the military strategic headquarters, it feels very different. As the Vice Chief, my role, I think, is very different to that of my predecessors. The Secretary of State has talked about the game changers, as I've referred to them, the Quad accountability, having a National Armaments Director and having the chain of command under the Chief of Defence Staff. But the thing that is making it work is having a military strategic headquarters. So whilst we have difficult conversations around the implementation of the SDR and the Defence Investment Plan, my responsibility in that headquarters is to carry on delivering stuff. I've referred to keeping the show on the road, keeping focused on delivery. The board that I run that we haven't had previously, I colloquially call the Getting Stuff Done board, because whilst all of this is happening, we need to keep delivering. Some of that has already been alluded to in terms of whether it's our housing strategy or industrial strategy or some of the contracts. From my perspective, if we hadn't reformed into a military strategic headquarters, we wouldn't have delivered on the SDR deliverables that we already have. So, for instance, the military, I know you've just been up to, or some of you have been up to RAF Witten, but the military intelligence services, the defence cyber, the counterintelligence unit, the defence cyber and EM force, we wouldn't have been able to corral around, this is different, we take an integrated force or pan-defence view, and we prioritise how we align resource with either warnings and indicators or priority threats. We didn't have a mechanism and we didn't have the authority to do that before. I mean, same in some of the people part of our organisation. I think it feels very different having an armed forces people person that sits on that board. We would have struggled to deliver things like the cyber direct entry. We would have struggled to deliver some of our foundation gap year piece.
That's the good. What's the bad? What frustrates you about the process? How would you tweak it, or what tweaks have you made as you've been rolling this out?
So we're building the team. I think that's my first thing. We want a very lean military strategic headquarters. What we don't need is a load more people adding more layers.
How many people in it?
Oh, I'd need to confirm. But in the central pillar part of it, it's less than 20 in terms of how we bring together what was already in existence through our military operations and commitments and what we did in our force development. I mean, those two pillars remain. It's the secret sauce was bringing those two things together so that we were able to have a prioritised view, what we do today, Armed Forces plan, and what we plan in the future. So we're building the muscle. We have an Armed Forces plan. This last year was the first time that we had a draft plan for all the reasons we've talked about. It needs to be balanced with resource. As we enter into April, we look for that to be a more balanced Armed Forces plan and deliver against it. We have more to do about some of our performance and risk reporting. I could go on, but there's still a lot more to do, but it feels very different to how it did 12 months ago.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add a couple of things, if you don't mind? So I took over as Principal Accounting Officer on the 1st of December. This is the 6th department I've worked in and the third I've run as permanent secretary. So I've seen a lot of government departments, and Defence has such an important but a complicated mission that it is delivering. I can really see the advantage only in the few weeks that I've been there of having those simpler, clearer accountabilities that come from the heart of defence reform. All the changes that the Vice Chief has referred to, and having the Vice Chief and the Chief of the Defence Staff really pulling together the different services and that responsibility for resourcing, for tasking that comes with defence reform really does make a difference. This year is obviously a transitional year, which sort of partly relates to the sort of answers on your questions on the budgeting regime. But I would worry about defining end states to organisational change. Organisations continually need to change and evolve. It's wrong to say that reform concludes. At a certain point, we will need to make a decision when you mainstream the changes that you're making, but never ever assume that you can draw a line on delivering change, continually improving organisations, as complicated as they may be.
Right, brilliant. Thank you very much. Alex Baker.
Thank you, Chair.
It's complicated.
Secretary of State, so since you've been in the job, have you actually had a formal briefing on the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, the NATO Communications and Information Agency, these NATO facilities, and how the UK could use them?
I haven't had a specific formal briefing on those, Ms Baker, but those have been part of some of the discussions that I've had when I've been up at NATO headquarters, and we've been meeting as defence ministers, particularly on the margins of some of those meetings.
I ask you about that because, you know, government is clear that we take a NATO first approach. The NAD has told us, when he came to see us before Christmas, that multilateral procurement, joint procurement is definitely part of the solution of how we move forward. We get all these services, these facilities, through our NATO membership. We're paying for them already, yet from everything I can see, the UK does not use these facilities. Germany has just procured 8 Sea Guardian remotely pilot aircraft. They're getting all the tax benefits and cost benefits. Spain, Italy, these countries are all using these agencies, yet the UK are not engaged at all from what I can see. Given money is tight, can we really afford to be paying for a facility and then not using it, and instead replicating it through our own departments, replicating the services that we could use through NATO?
One of, quite rightly, the top priorities of Mark Rutte when he became Secretary General of NATO was a greater drive to see more joint commissioning and interoperable standards through NATO across our defence systems, something that I and we are really strongly behind. I will provide the committee, if you'll allow me, Mr. Chairman, a note with how far we're using those.
Thank you.
But where there are multilateral mechanisms like the OCCAR system, and we can use them, and they're appropriate, we do use them. But I'll just say the principle that we don't do some of the big things alone isn't just about using the multinational systems. If you look at the Lunar House Agreement, at the heart of it, the biggest ever British warship deal that we've struck with Norway, that isn't about us selling to Norway. That is about two nations jointly now commissioning our anti-submarine hunting frigates, the future upgrade of systems that we'll need, doing it together, because that allows us not just to have interoperable standards and equipment, it allows us effectively to have combined navies that will help keep the North Atlantic and High North safe in the future. So the combination and the principle that we do things with allies where we can, and where it produces a better security or a better value for money, is a really sound one, a really important one.
Great to hear. I just fear that we are not using these agencies because we generally think we know best, and that actually we just have had a tradition of not using them, so we continue to not use them. Would you commit to going and actually taking a fact-finding mission to look at those NATO facilities and whether we could use them going forward?
Well, let me first of all commit to providing you the chapter and verse in the areas you're interested in. Then take a view about whether you think we're using them effectively or sufficiently. I will do the same at that point.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lincoln Job.
Cabinet Secretary, hopefully a very quick one. I think it was about November 2024 we had one of these sessions with the Secretary of State and your predecessor, and at that the then Permanent Secretary said that he would reduce the number of full-time equivalent civil servants in the Ministry of Defence by 10% over the course of this Parliament. I've reconfirmed that that was indeed the Secretary of State's aim in the Chamber of the House of Commons subsequently. Just seek reassurance that that is indeed still your aim.
So it is a part of the SDR efficiency programme. The commitment is to reduce between 2026-27 to 2029-2030, just to be precise. Reduction in civil service workforce costs of 10% is the aim that we set out in the SDR. The reassurance I would give you and give the committee is that the numbers are declining, and the latest information I have is we were just a little bit over 55,000 full-time equivalent civil servants at the start of December last year, 2025. I mean, I would note, though, this is best done as part of a sort of a serious efficiency programme, which is the thing that we need to put in place. Civil servants provide incredibly valuable work, and something that I have heard clearly from military colleagues is, at times, there can be benefit in civil servants taking on roles that the military have done historically, and that ultimately that can be a better way of creating a sort of integrated force, and the Vice Chief may want to talk about this. So we need to approach this carefully in a way that optimises value for money, make sure that we can provide the support we need, that in particular the National Armaments Director has a group that has the scale and the expertise that it needs in order to ensure that we can deliver the equipment that our military need.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, on to Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Chair. Can we just go back to the SDO, and why has the MOD not agreed with the committee's recommendation that we should produce a publicly available annual report on the progress of the SDO implementation?
Because we have an annual cycle of reporting in full the work of the department. The SDR is not a subset of that. The SDR is essentially the framework and the vision within which Defence will now make its decisions, set its priorities, and deliver the programmes and the aims that it set out. So it fundamentally sets the it fundamentally sort of sets the direction for the department itself, Mr. Twigg, rather than being this is something that you can separate off and report on and pursue separately from the work of the department.
So other than the Defence Investment Plan, has the department implemented all the SDO commitments due to be completed by the end of 2025?
We've largely done that, and I can provide for the committee a sort of running log of where the SDR report attached timelines, target timelines. We've been hitting those, and I can give the committee a sort of rundown on those.
Not sort of play on words.
Which one do you want to ask me about?
The word you said largely, so that suggests that some haven't, or some parts of it haven't. So could you enlighten us on that?
Yep.
Because otherwise you could have said yes in full, but you didn't.
Okay, so there is a recommendation with a very exacting timetable over reworking and revamping certain elements of military training, and we're off the pace on that.
Yeah.
But to my knowledge and recognition, we've been determined to act where we can, to make decisions where we need to, and to implement the SDR, including the recommendations where they have early timescales. And in some cases, we've exceeded what they've set out. And so I think if it's helpful to the committee, I can give you a sort of, if you like,
it'd be useful to know.
A six month audit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure whether you're going to say, well, I can't tell you what the problems are with training because it would give away some sort of secret, but I just wonder what specifically the obstacles are there.
So refer to the military head of training.
Yeah, so I was going to use that as an example. There's two in my mind that I know that we haven't delivered against, that we said we would do by the end of 2025. The particular one around our training review, if I'm perfectly honest, it was being very clear about defining what the question was, and then how we proceeded with that across our reformed areas, because as you will recognise...
Sorry to interrupt, defined what the question was?
Yes, yeah, so what's the scope of the recommendation? So what's the good that we're going to get out of it? So that was part of it. Part of it also, in all honesty, was making sure that we were clear who in the reformed world was leading that work, because as you'll recognise, some of that is very much connected to a Department of State business, some of it was connected to a military strategic headquarters, so we are slightly behind the curve in defining that one.
And Professor Malcolm Chalmers' involvement in the SDR and the Defence Investment Plan, is he heavily involved? Because he was brought in as a obviously exceptionally experienced and knowledgeable person. What's his involvement been? Yeah,
look, he is an exceptional person with exceptional experience, as you say, Mr. Twigg, in the SDR. He played a major role in chairing one of the review and challenge streams of work. Since we've been fortunate enough to bring him into the department as a strategic advisor and head of SONAC in Old Money, he's playing a part in the big strategic decisions and debates we're having within the department. He's advising me and he's contributing to the defence investment planning process.
Mm-hmm. So what's he brought to the table in terms of anything additional the department didn't have already?
But I can let the two representatives of the department offer you a view on that. For my money, he's bringing what he and a number of others, but he in particular did bring in the strategic defence review process, a deep expertise and a degree of external challenge that we've been able to bring
what I'm trying to find out is what he's actually added. You know, what's changed as a result of his involvement. What is different and better?
For me, it adds to the blend of different perspectives and advice that, as Secretary of State, I'm able to draw on.
Okay. Can I just ask you before I finish? You will notice that Civitas has published today an understanding of the UK's transition to war-fighting readiness. And one of the key, which I've called for Mr Bernard Jenkins and Chris Donnelly, one of the key, there's a number of key issues I think. One is how we need, and if we go back to the CDS's comments, that we're not ready enough yet to deal with an all-out war, basically. So I just wondered, what's your take on where we are, not just in defence terms, but a whole society, government approach to moving to a war footing and dealing with the current challenges today? Where do you think we are at this point in time?
First of all, I would always argue, and I had total confidence, if we had to commit our troops to fight tonight, they would do so. The observations in the SDR, reinforced, if I may say so, by a good report that you, Bernard Jenkins and Chris Donnelly, have authored and published today, reinforces that recognition that in a period where threats are rising, demands on defence are rising, then the level of warfighting readiness, which was at the heart of the SDR, needs to be increased. On the question that the SDR set out, which is a recognition that we learn from Ukraine, or if you like, are reminded from Ukraine that when a country is seriously under threat or forced to fight, it isn't just its forces, it's the industry, it's the innovation, it's society behind it. That requires some of the responses that you will see in the Armed Forces Bill that had its second reading yesterday in the House of Commons, with the change outlined and indicated in the SDR to the way that we approach and develop our reservists forces.
You're focusing on defence alone, which we know, but it's not about just defence. It's about the whole society government approach. Going down to the finance sector, going right across through industry, and also. So I just wonder, trying to get your take on where you think we are. Are we some way off yet, and lots more work needs to be done, or do you think real progress is being made?
Some progress is made.
Yeah.
There is clearly lots still to be done, and you're quite right to say this is whole of government. It has to be driven from the centre. My concern is to make sure that where defence can make the most telling and important contributions, we get on and do that. So we're doing that on reservists, we're doing that on new ways of bringing people into the forces, like with our cyber direct entry. We're doing that by stepping up the work we're doing, including legislative changes on drone threats or threats to undersea critical infrastructure. And we're doing that with some of the action we want to take on shadow shipping as well.
Right, brilliant. I want to Jesse Norman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to draw the committee's attention to my register of interests. We're some way in, Secretary of State. I'd be grateful if you and the team could be relatively clipped, if you can, because there's a certain amount to get through. You've spoken about defence spending, £6 billion here. I think you said 270 billion over the life of the Parliament. One of the problems of talking about defence spending in percentage terms of GDP is that when GDP is barely growing, it doesn't really help. Would it not be a much better system just to identify specific numbers that government is committing to over the length of a spending review, so that everyone can work to those numbers on the CDL and RDL side, and you know exactly where you are, and therefore it becomes a plannable, manageable process rather than just juggling around within percentages of GDP?
Well, Mr. Norman, we do both. But you'll know that if you like, the currency, the yardstick in particular for NATO members, is a percentage of GDP. commitment. You'll know also, because of certainly the last 15 years, where economic growth has been very sluggish, that has a disadvantage if you're interested in and concerned about the quantum. It's why that I've stressed to this committee not just that we have made the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, or that we're hitting, as the Prime Minister announced a year ago, 2.5% of GDP 3 years earlier than your party was proposing and anyone expected us. But in this year alone, there's an extra 6 billion in the defence budget. So it's just over, it's over 60 billion, and in this Parliament alone, it'll be 270 billion that we'll be spending on defence, and we'll hit 3% in the next.
I was asking about a technical matter, and you've made a slightly party political response, which is a pity, I think, for the committee. Let's just talk a little bit about what the Prime Minister said. In a speech last year, he said that he wanted to see security and defence as a central organising principle of government, the first thought in the morning and the last at night. And so there is a sense that, and he's explicitly calling for, and you have done, and the SDR has done, a national conversation about security and defence. So the question is, how much of a priority is that national conversation for you, for the government?
Look, in many ways, you could define what a national conversation might be about defence in many ways. And actually, the very challenges we've seen the Prime Minister and the government dealing with over the last fortnight are part of that. It's one of the reasons that we've seen in recent public opinion surveys, defence now rising to be the third most issue of concern alongside the NHS in the country. The question for me as Defence Secretary is how we help people recognise the nature of the changing world, the era of new threat, the imperative for greater vigilance and resilience in this country, but also how we demonstrate that when we're willing as a nation to invest more in defence, as we must, then that is making us more secure and safer, but is also bringing direct benefits to areas and jobs and young people that they see, which is why the defence role in helping drive economic growth is also so important.
But who is responsible for leading that national conversation?
I think a little bit as Mr. Twigg was asking about, if you're having a national conversation and you've got a whole of society, nature of the challenges and threats that we face, which is undoubtedly the case when you look at cyber or you look at the concern about critical national infrastructure and underseas, then that's got to be an effort that's led by government as a whole from the centre.
No, which individual? Is that the Prime Minister?
Well, that'll be for the it'll be for the Prime Minister with his cabinet, and it'll be for the National Security Secretariat and the National Security Advisor.
Okay, you've said it's amorphous as to what a national conversation means. It's a term that was introduced into the SDR, and government's been talking about it. Prime Minister's spoken about a national effort. How many speeches has the Prime Minister given on the national conversation and the need to broadcast the importance of defence and security to the nation? I'm afraid you'll have to ask number 10 for a record of those. I don't keep count of the number of speeches the Prime Minister makes. And okay, I think the answer is.
I think he probably gives half a dozen a day.
I suspect the answer is 0 on this. How many public engagement events have been held either to your awareness out of either MOD or number 10 or the Cabinet Office? I mean, in other words, you've talked about the importance of a national conversation, and it's proper to ask what's being done about it. So how many public engagement events have you held? Okay, how many public
I'm pausing only because you draw the parameters so wide, it's quite difficult to know how to answer. I'm perfectly prepared to
okay, have you made a lot of speeches, Secretary of State? Have you made a lot of speeches up and down the country saying it's a national problem here, we need to be thinking of this in the Prime Minister's words, first thought in the morning, last at night? We need people to understand we're potentially in a pre-war situation. Have you given those speeches, and how many have you given? How much engagement has there been?
In a way, the thinking of the SDR, that sort of concern, the Prime Minister's quite absolutely accurate description about how defence is now central to the thinking and the duty of this government. It imbues almost everything I say, everywhere I go, on every occasion.
Right, but I'm talking about the levels of communication, what you're doing to raise. Do you, for example, publish threat assessments so that people can see in the public how the threat from China and Russia is increasing in line with the concerns that the Prime Minister's articulated?
So the government has risk registers, it has threat assessments, it publishes what it can of that as a regular element. This House plays a part in that, this committee plays a part in it, the Intelligence Security Committee plays a part in exactly that sort of national conversation and that awareness building of what we're facing.
You don't think it's astonishing how little has been done when you consider that you've just raised the reservist age from 55 to 65, haven't seen any major discussion of the rationale for that or embedding it in a national conversation. Let's ask another question. Prime Minister
With respect, that was discussed yesterday in the House of Commons when we had the second
I'm
reading
talking
of the
about
Armed
governments
Forces
getting
bill.
out there to the people of this
set
country,
out in the explanatory
getting
notes
out to the
the
people of
bill,
this country and saying,
and we'd welcome your
and
contribution to that debate as the bill goes
this is
through Parliament.
No, I don't think it's a parliamentary matter. It's a matter of government discharging the Prime Minister's obligation to think about this first thing in the morning and last at night as a national effort, which is what he's said. So here's a question. This is supposed to be cross-departmental, so it might include Department of Health, Innovation, Technology, Business and Trade. So which departments have been formally tasked with working on the national conversation alongside the Ministry of Defence?
That is government work in progress.
Okay, and has any policy or spending commitment been changed as a result of this interdepartmental government working that you've called for and he's called for?
There's certainly been commitments that we've made in defence that reflect exactly that.
No, but in other departments, we're talking about innovation and science. And
so I can answer for the Defence Department as Defence Secretary. I can try and get you answers from other departments. I'm not here and I can't, I'm afraid, answer for what other government departments have done.
No, but you're in charge of the National Defence Strategy with Number 10. They've talked about a national conversation. It's interdepartmental. These departments are working to you to establish the outlines of this National Defence Strategy. I'm asking you what's been done. You're not able to answer. I'd be grateful if you would write to the committee, but I do think it's telling that not only has nothing been said publicly in any great scale about raising public awareness of this vital issue, but very little has been done, it appears, within government to ensure that departments are properly aligned. Let me ask a final question. How long are we going to have to wait before we can judge whether this initiative, a national conversation, has succeeded or failed?
It's a good question. Rather like reform, I don't see there's a point of success or failure. I don't see a point of completion, particularly as we know that the threats and the challenges that we're facing are evolving in the whole time. You're quite right to challenge me and challenge the government on this important area. It'll be an area that we hope we can achieve cross-party consensus because it requires a whole of government and a whole of politics effort to this. But I don't think there'll be a point. I really genuinely don't see a point where it's done and it can be declared a success or failure.
Maybe I can assist you in that. I think the Strategic Defence Review said it was 2 years. Fair enough.
But I mean, the serious point here is the fundamental point is that if a country is stepping up to the challenge that Mr. Norman is quite rightly outlining here, that is a challenge that's defined by the threats we face, the security environment. That doesn't stop changing or evolving or reach a point where it's done, whether or not the SDR may have said or suggested 2 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was in recommendation 26 where it said it would be completed within 2 years as part of the process. But anyway, let's move on swiftly, given the lack of time, to Lincoln Jopp.
To say, you're a busy man, so you may not have had the opportunity to see your two predecessors and the former Minister for the Armed Forces giving evidence a week ago today.
I didn't, no.
Okay. In summary, particularly Sir Ben Wallace and James Heapy outlined the following thesis. From the mid-90s onwards, governments of both parties took a capability holiday when it came. They hollowed out defence. And what enabled them to do so was the fact that the perception of the threat is run by the information flow that comes out of the Ministry of Defence, and the perception of our readiness to meet it is a result of the information flow that does or doesn't come out of defence. And Mr. Heapy in particular was very concerned that so many things that came across his desk which said, we're really not ready to meet this threat, also had stamped all over them, this is far too sensitive for you to talk about in public. And so, as a result of this conspiracy of optimism, successive governments have chosen, in effect, butter over guns, while the Russians were choosing guns. And therefore, we have a massive mismatch of threat. And Mr. Heapy said that he worked with the permanent secretary. He was deeply uneasy about this, and he said he worked with the permanent secretary because he said, what happened in the Cold War? Because you know, the perception here is that you're not being very frank with us over the last 18 months about our inability to meet the threat as it currently exists and will evolve. And he said during the Cold War that what would happen is that a pretty warts and all report would go to the Defence Select Committee. They would make their reports and redact the sensitive information. And this was at the most freezing times of the Cold War in the 70s and 80s. And both Sir Ben and James said, look, the machine sitting on your left is absolutely institutionally way too cautious. They won't play the role that you need them to in order to start this national conversation, which means that you can actually convince people that, yes, education is important, yes, health is important, but defence is incredibly important and may mean that we need to start choosing some guns rather than some batter. Would you like to react to that thesis?
Well, you're encouraging me to read their evidence, first of all. But I think part of my mission before the election, at the election and since, has been, as Defence Secretary, to draw attention to the threats we face, to argue that this is a new era for defence, that steps need to be taken, and the government has demonstrated a seriousness for that by making this big commitment, not just to boosting defence budgets this year, in the first year, but making the commitment to raising defence spending. Now, as politicians, from whatever party, we know that's unsustainable unless you can take the public with it. And I think that there is a public recognition that this is required. There is a recognition that hard power is required alongside good alliances. And that's characterised the approach that we've tried to take as a new government over the last 18 months. But I agree with you're kind of doing your side of the bargain, but I don't think anyone else, and it comes back to Mr. Norman's earlier question, I don't think anyone else across government thinks that they need to put down arrows in their budgets in order to make them safer. I'm sorry, that's exactly.
Members of organizations instrumental to the successful arrests operation last week. We will also show you some video from that operation, which we will make available to you after this briefing. We will not be taking additional questions. We will begin this morning with remarks from Lafayette Mayor Tony Rosworski.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. We do appreciate you coming today. We know that might not have been an easy trip for some with this weather, so we certainly do appreciate you being here. It probably goes without saying that this has been a difficult time period for our community, for Judge Meyer and his wife, Kim. This is, one of those incidents that really strike at the heart of a community, and it really makes you think about some of those fundamental aspects. And I can tell you with a deep sense of pride that this community has really responded. We didn't take a step back, and neither did the Myers, neither did our law enforcement agencies, our first responders or medical personnel, our judicial system or our prosecutor's office. That did not happen in this community. This community stepped forward. It stepped forward with determination, and it stepped forward with perseverance. It demonstrated an unwavering commitment to our justice system, and with an overwhelming outpouring of kindness and compassion and support for the Myers family. When faced with violence meant to intimidate and disrupt, this community chose strength. We chose unity. We chose to stand together to protect the greatest system of justice in the world. I want to specifically recognize the Lafayette Police Department for all of their work, the incredible job that they have done, the hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of work that they have put in to this case. I want to thank all of our other local, state, our federal partners that are here today, and some of you will hear speak. I can tell you what a tremendous group of individuals and professionals. We cannot thank you enough. Through this difficult time, you have performed with the highest level of professionalism, competency, and determination. Your actions reflect the very best of public service and commitment to the rule of law. On behalf of the City of Lafayette, myself as the mayor, and personally as a retired captain with the Lafayette Police Department, I want to thank each and every member here today, your agencies, all your staff that played a role. From the bottom of my heart, I cannot thank all of you enough. It is deeply appreciated. And because of that cooperation, we're here today for this press conference, and the dedication of many of those public servants and the courage and strength shown by Kim and Steve Meyer, that act of violence did not prevail. Our community remains strong, our judicial system remains intact, and together we continue to move forward united, resilient, and unwavering in our commitment to justice. Thank you very much, and I'd like to now introduce Chief Scott Galloway of the Lafayette Police Department.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I do want to note, thank you for the kind words of support, that the mayor was engaged in this from the very beginning. At briefings, all the briefings that we had, even into the night, staying late for when we carried out our arrest plan. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your support. We live in a place where we have great leadership with our city council and with our entire community. So again, it starts at the top. Good morning, everybody. My name is Scott Galloway, G-A-L-L-O-W-A-Y. I'm the police chief for Lafayette Police Department, and I want to, just like the mayor said, I want to welcome members of the media who traveled here from Indianapolis or wherever, and also our local media members. Thank you for being here. This is an important thing that we're here to discuss. And I want to start by saying, kind of like the mayor mentioned, we are proud of our city, and I'm deeply proud of the men and women of the Lafayette Police Department. They stand dedicated to keeping this community safe every single day. The arrests made in this case are a result of the combined effort involving multiple local, state, and federal agencies. Across the board, this was a lion-hearted effort. This investigation never stopped. The response from law enforcement was tenacious, focused, and unrelenting. The personnel of the Lafayette Police Department, utilizing every skill, resource, and technical advantage at their disposal, worked with sheer will to develop probable cause necessary to remove these 5 people from our streets. In doing so, they secured the very justice to which Judge Meyer has dedicated his entire life. This was a true partnership alongside the Indiana State Police, the FBI, and the vital support of our Tippecanoe County Sheriff's Department, West Lafayette Police Department, and Purdue University Police Department. Thank you for assisting us and giving us resources that we needed to get these violent criminals off the street. We must remember why we are here today. For Judge Meyer and his wife, this is personal. They are not just public officials. They are pillars of this community who have dedicated decades of their life to public service. They are kind, generous people who embody the values of Lafayette. While we are heartened that Judge Meyer and his wife are on the road to recovery, we recognize that this attack was more than an assault on 2 citizens. To me, and every law enforcement leader on the stage and the people they serve, this was an assault on the rule of law itself. By targeting members of the judiciary, the individuals didn't just attack a person, they attempted to strike the very foundation of our justice system and the safety of our entire community. I want to extend a sincere thanks to Prosecutor Harrington, as attorneys, as investigators in his major crimes unit. They worked alongside us 24 hours a day, drafting warrants, subpoenas, providing critical investigative insights, and meticulously constructing a comprehensive probable cause affidavit that brought us to this point. We do now have a little bit of a video to show you, and I can kind of narrate through this. This provides the scale of this operation. We're going to provide footage regarding the apprehension of the suspects, Raylan Ferguson, Thomas Moss, and Blake Smith. It's critical to recognize these arrests were synchronized in a single operation, coordinated across multiple agencies and jurisdictions that all occurred simultaneously. So we can show this and kind of narrate a little bit as we go through. Get this started. What's this available? So this first one is Raylan Ferguson, who was arrested in Brookston on a traffic stop conducted by the Indiana State Police, our Street Crimes Unit, and FBI. You see the 2 state troopers getting out. That's Raylan Ferguson there. They've detained him. The body cam footage you see is of our street crimes officers, who then take him into custody in the back of a squad car and start the booking process. Again, it's short. They went off very well. Thomas Moss, you can see he is from the Tippecanoe County area. This is his house.
Step to your left. Now walk backwards slowly. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Hands up. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
And then Blake Smith was arrested in Dayton, Indiana. And again, you can see who was involved in that. These are all coordinated efforts. And that's Blake Smith being apprehended and walked to the police car. No one was injured during any of these. Again, that goes to the testament of the planning and execution of all the SWAT teams, of the members of our local community, FBI, and state police. Also arrested at this same time was Donata Greer, and we thank the Lexington, Kentucky Police Department and the FBI in Lexington that assisted with that. Amanda Millsap was arrested here at Lafayette Police Headquarters building. In closing, for my comments, I want to again thank the men and women of the Lafayette Police Department for their tireless dedication, as well as community partners who stepped forward with case facts and evidence. Their cooperation was vital. And at this time, I want to turn it over to Tippecanoe County Prosecutor Patrick Harrington.
Thank you, Chief. I also like to thank some other law enforcement agencies for their help. As many of us know in our community, when this first happened, we did not know the scope of this or who else may be targeted. The Audubon Town Marshal, Benton County Sheriff's Department, Battleground Marshals, Dayton Town Marshals, Clinton County Sheriff. We thank the Tippecanoe County Sheriff's Department. This is an overwhelming task of logistics for the sheriff to have to coordinate his staff with all these different agencies. I thank personally the West Lafayette Police Department for what they've done, and also the Purdue University Police Department. The resources that our office uses, as the chief just said, is we have a major crime unit. It involves 3 prosecuting attorneys, an investigator, and our high-tech crime unit. We were called on this case in real time, within the first probably 30 minutes. We've been with them almost nonstop since then. The chief outlined what we've been doing. What you see here in our community is a collaborative effort that we work together, different agencies, to solve crime, to make our community one of the safest in the United States. You may have questions about the process going forward. You should have been aware of the Indiana Supreme Court appointing the Cass County judge over this case. We do not know yet, and it may have been set while I've been here, any initial hearing dates or their locations. But that process will move forward, and they will have their initial hearings. That's all I have for you. Once again, thank you, law enforcement, for helping and assisting all of us in this. I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Al Williamson of the Indiana State Police Investigative Division.
Good morning. As we all know, this was a severe attack on our judicial system. This wasn't just going after a man and woman in their house. They went after him for a reason. He was targeted. When this happens, this occurred, we were contacted by Lafayette Police Department. We have a great working relationship with their police department. Our agency's input and work on this case involves the best part was our laboratory, Indianapolis Regional Lab. Over the weekend, 3 of our analysts came in on their own time, off when they weren't supposed to be working on evidence for this case. It involved our SWAT, all of our high-profile technical units came out, our undercover people came out, and as you saw in the video, the road troopers assisted as well. We can't thank Lafayette, FBI, Sheriff's Department, everybody we've worked with on this case. We're assisting Lafayette. We're in an assist role. They are an excellent department. They did a great job. All we can hope for is a positive resolution, so show the message that we will not tolerate this. This will not be taken anywhere in the state of Indiana or anywhere in the country when you start attacking the judicial system that we uphold today. So thank you. I'd like to introduce Special Agent in Charge, Tim O'Malley, FBI.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Tim O'Malley. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the FBI for state of Indiana. Over a week ago now, there was an attack against, a senseless targeted attack against a member of the judiciary. The FBI and the Department of Justice stand with this community, and our thoughts and prayers are with you as they continue to recover from this act. Violence or threats of violence against the judiciary or any public service is unacceptable. Attacks like this strike at the core of who we are as a civil society and erode the rule of law and will not be tolerated. While the Lafayette PD was the lead for this investigation, I want to tell you that the FBI was also involved. We brought to bear resources in the area of technical assets, our evidence response team, our crime scene investigators, our surveillance teams were also involved. And of course, we helped coordinate some of the activity that crossed over state lines, both up north into Michigan and down south into Louisville, into Kentucky. Above all, I just want to say that these arrests represent what law enforcement is like here in the state of Indiana. It's about collaboration on all levels, on the local, state, and federal levels. And this was a great example of what we can do when we work together. I just want to close by saying one last thing. For those of you who don't understand or don't appreciate, the FBI is here in this community. We work tirelessly every day to investigate violent crime and crimes like this. And I just want people to know that they can always call the FBI. We have a phone number that's so easy to remember, 1-800-CALL-FBI, and we appreciate it when people call us with any types of tips, whether it be in a case like this or something else that might seem suspicious or out of the ordinary. So with that, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. We appreciate the public's interest in this case and the media's role in sharing accurate information. At the same time, this remains an active criminal prosecution, and we are mindful of our obligation to protect the integrity of that process. At this time, the Lafayette Police Department will not be answering additional questions regarding the details of this case. Any further inquiries regarding court filings, charging documents, or case scheduling should be directed to the Tippecanoe County Clerk's Office, which maintains the official court record. We appreciate your understanding and your professionalism. Thank you for attending this briefing.
Excellencies, friends, welcome. We ask you to kindly take your seats. Excellencies, friends, please, if we could kindly ask you to move to your seats. We'll be starting the commemoration very shortly. Excellencies, friends, please do move to your seats. One more time. Excellencies and friends, please kindly take your seats. Please kindly take your seats, excellencies and friends. Please kindly take your seats. We'll be starting very shortly. Thank you.
Dear guests, may I ask you to please be seated so that we may begin? Thank you for taking your seats. Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Ms. Annalena Baerbock, President of the 80th session of the General Assembly, Excellencies, friends, Rabbi Artur Schneier and his wife Elizabeth, and all Holocaust survivors and their families who are here today, World War II veterans, friends and colleagues. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Melissa Fleming, and I lead the Department of Global Communications. And it is my honor to welcome you to the annual observance of the International Day of Commemoration of the Victims of the Holocaust. We express our deep gratitude to the survivors who are joining us today on this solemn occasion. Dear survivors, may I ask you to please raise your hand so that we can acknowledge you. Thank you. Dear guests, on the 27th of January 1945, the Soviet Army liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp. One soldier, Officer Vasily Davidov, wrote, "Wherever one looked, one saw piles of human bodies. In some places, the former prisoners, looking like living skeletons, sat or lay around. Many of them could not be helped. A few who could still walk took us around the camp and told us what happened there. It is impossible to describe everything that we saw there." Primo Levi, survivor of Auschwitz III, Buna Monowitz, remembered the moment of liberation. "In the very hour in which every threat seemed to vanish, I was overcome by a new and greater pain, the pain of exile, of my distant home, of my loneliness, of friends lost, of youth lost. Today, we remember those for whom there was no liberation. Children, like brothers Emanuel and Afram Rosenthal, photographed in February 1944 in the Kovno ghetto in Lithuania. Less than a month later, the Nazis murdered the little boys because they were Jewish. Emanuel was 2, Avram was 5. They had a right to life. The Holocaust is devastating evidence of what happens when human rights are degraded, denied, and destroyed. We honor the victims by remembering their humanity and defending the history, and by taking action to confront anti-Semitism and challenge prejudice wherever we find it. May I ask you now, you all have candles in front of you. I think many of you have already turned them on, but those of you who haven't, please turn on your candles and join me in a moment of silence and reflection in remembrance of the victims of the Holocaust. And to those who are able, could I kindly ask you to stand up? Thank you. It is my honor now to welcome the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, to deliver remarks.
Excellencies, dear friends, I am deeply honored to join you and humbled by the presence of Holocaust survivors and their families. We gather in solemn remembrance of the victims of the Holocaust. They were mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, grandparents and grandchildren. 6 million Jews murdered just because they were Jewish. We also grieve the Roma and Sinti, the people with disabilities, LGBTQI+ people, and so many more who were enslaved, persecuted, tortured, and killed. And we also remember the stories and struggles of those who confronted the worst of humanity to show us the best. Diplomats who defied orders and issued life-saving visas. Journalists who fought to expose the truth. And farmers and villagers with families at great peril. Remembrance is more than honoring the past. It is a duty and a promise to defend dignity, to protect the vulnerable, and to keep faith with those whose names and stories we refuse to forget. The Holocaust, after all, is not only history, it is a warning that hatred, once unleashed, can consume everything. Excellencies, dear friends, today that warning feels more urgent than ever. Anti-Semitism around the world is raging. Jewish communities live in fear. Synagogues attacked, families shattered, vile anti-Semitic hatred racing across cyberspace. We are haunted by the horrific terror attack of October 7, which I once again categorically condemn, along with the taking of hostages and the acts of hatred targeting Jews around the world in recent years, and indeed in recent weeks. But coming together as we have come today to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust fills me with hope. I see the power of humanity in all of you. I see the courage of survivors who turned pain into purpose. I see the commitment of young people of every faith and nation standing together against hate. I see the strength of solidarity when communities unite. You are here because you choose hope over hate. You choose remembrance as a living force, a shield against prejudice, a spark for justice, a pledge to protect every human being. Excellencies, dear friends, this show of unity is more important than ever because we know the Holocaust is a stark demonstration of the dangers of unchecked hatred. The Holocaust did not begin with killing. It began with words. Its architects telegraphed their evil intentions. They deliberately spread a hateful supremacist ideology that preyed on fear and economic despair. This powerful engine of hate was given fuel through the systematic dismantling of democratic institutions, the stifling of the press, the persecution of civil society, the corruption of courts, and the erosion of the rule of law. It included the mastery of the technology of the time, controlling information, deploying propaganda and manipulating public discourse, spreading anti-Semitic and racist hatred with devastating efficiency. And we must never forget the painful truth that Jewish families who sought refuge were met with the cold shoulder of indifference, closed borders, and bureaucratic barriers. This dark chapter of our common history reveals sobering truths. When those with power fail to act, evil goes unpunished. When the past is distorted, denied, and weaponized, hatred and prejudice fester. When words become weapons, lies, conspiracies, the casual joke and the coded slur can grow until the unthinkable becomes policy and violence. So let us together pledge to stand against anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred, and against bigotry, racism, and discrimination anywhere and everywhere. Excellencies, dear friends, this is the 10th time I have the privilege as Secretary General to address you on this day of remembrance. For me, Holocaust remembrance and the fight against the ancient poison of anti-Semitism is not abstract. It is personal. One of my personal achievements as Prime Minister of Portugal was working with Parliament to adopt a decree that revoked the 16th century expulsion of Jews from my country. I am happy to see tens of thousands of descendants of those expelled families regaining Portuguese nationality. This was a symbolic step, but one that demonstrated the importance of acknowledging the depth of our remorse, even remorse for the crimes of our country, remorse for the past, and our commitment to build a better, more inclusive future. A commitment that goes to the core of what brings us here today in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. As Secretary General, I remember standing in Yad Vashem, confronted by the immense weight of memory and the countless lives extinguished in the darkness of hatred. I've prayed together with the Jewish community in the aftermath of atrocious acts of violence and anti-Semitism. And I have heard testimonies from Holocaust survivors about their experiences that began with a knock on the door and ended with lives erased. And I've always understood the clear link between the horrors of the Holocaust and the spirit of multilateralism, justice, and rights that founded our organization. Excellencies, dear friends, just over 8 years ago, the Nuremberg trials began. These trials represented the beginning of a new era of international criminal law, an era in which individuals, including the most powerful, are held accountable. And today, more than ever, we need to reclaim that spirit. At the opening of Nuremberg, Justice Robert H. Jackson warned us, and I quote, "These prisoners represent sinister influences that will lurk in the world long after their bodies have returned to dust." End of quote. These influences, anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, are very much still with us. And our duty is clear: to speak the truth, to educate new generations, to confront anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and discrimination, and to defend the dignity of every human being. But it is also our duty to keep alive the spirit of acting in common purpose through multilateralism, to ensure that the forces of humanity always triumph over the forces of inhumanity. Let us honor the memory of the victims of the Holocaust by recommitting to justice, dignity, compassion, and violence, to a world where humanity stands united against oppression, and where the terrible legacy of the past strengthens our resolve to protect human rights today and in the future. Let us forever carry in our hearts the Holocaust victims, whose calls for justice and peace can never be extinguished. May their memory be a blessing, and I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General, Guterres, and it is my honor to invite Her Excellency, Ms. Annalena Baerbock, President of the 80th session of the General Assembly, to deliver remarks.
Six million Jews, almost 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, murdered, targeted and killed simply for who they were, Jews. Millions more, including Roma and Sinti, people with disabilities, LGBTQ+, killed in cold blood, being described by Nazi Germany as asozial, not worthy of life. Human beings inflicted these horrors upon other human beings made possible by dehumanization that allowed unimaginable cruelty to become routine, what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, Rabbi Schneider, ladies and gentlemen, and especially distinguished Holocaust survivors, Mrs. Conrad, Mrs. Weinstein, dear Ms. Tomenko, and Ms. Blumenthal-Lazan, who I just met at the corridor and realized that the deportation camp Bergen-Belsen, where she was deported as a child, I visited decades later as a student from my school. Dear Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, on today's International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, it is our duty not only to recommit to the promise of never again, a promise that is etched into the very DNA of our United Nations, its Charter, and its Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But it's also our duty to speak out, even louder than before, when signs of dehumanization emerge again. As the Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers, it began with words and with laws, with singling out Jews just because they were Jews, with synagogues burned, and with neighbors who choose silence when the Jewish store next door was boycotted, and when the owner was dragged out from his home with his little girl. As Holocaust survivor Simon Wiesenthal said, "For evil to flourish, it only requires good men to do nothing." A quote you can also find at the memorial site of the former concentration camp Auschwitz. And given that we are living in times with shockingly high levels of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, just these days, a study came out from UNESCO that in 3/4 of every classroom in Western Europe, you see anti-Semitism these days. I'm very thankful to the mission of Poland and Germany, who will enable us to have a live virtual guided tour of the different sites of Auschwitz-Birkenau tomorrow here at the United Nations at 8:30 a.m. in the Trusteeship Council chamber. In times where people deny that Auschwitz even happened, a guide at Auschwitz will take us to the piles of millions of shoes being exposed there. Shoes like yours, big and small, brown little shoes of girls, sandals like our own daughters would wear, torn off from the little Jewish girl taken from her home, torn off from her alongside her clothes, her hair, stripping away every shred of humanity before sending her with millions to the gas chamber. Think of these shoes, the shoes of the little Jewish girl she once wore. Every time you hear and see the warning signs of what made the Holocaust possible once, in rhetoric of us versus them, the dehumanization of people, putting Jews against others. This means not turning a blind eye to anti-Semitism, in all its different forms. When more than 1,400 Jews were murdered, slaughtered, and kidnapped at the Nova Music Festival, in their kibbutzim, at their homes, on the 7th of October. Or when you read an online post denying that the Holocaust happened. But also when your colleague is afraid to show her Star of David necklace. And also when your neighbors are faced with racial profiling, with Islamophobia, with sexism, with homophobia. Because questioning the rights of some simply for who they are, where they come from, or what the color of their skin is, has all the same end: dehumanization, which eventually spreads to all. As back then, German pastor Martin Niemöller warned and engraved at the Holocaust Memorial in Boston, Massachusetts, in a longer version, I quote, "When they came for the Jews, I did not speak up. I wasn't a Jew. When they came for the Catholics, I did not speak up. I was a Protestant. When they came for me, no one was left to speak up." Never again is not a slogan. It's a duty to speak up and to stand up, to defend the dignity and human rights, not of some, but of every member of our human family, everywhere, every day.
I thank the President of the General Assembly, Annalisa Baerbock, and I would now like to invite His Excellency Mr. Danny Danon, Permanent Representative of Israel, to deliver his remarks.
Esteemed Holocaust survivors, UN Secretary General Guterres, President of the General Assembly, Ms. Baerbock, US Ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Waltz, Rabbi Schneier, distinguished guests. We are gathered here today to remember the Holocaust, the deliberate murder of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Alongside them, millions of others were murdered. It was the darkest chapter in human history. We remember because memory matters, because education matters, because honoring the victims matters. We remember here in the UN General Assembly because the UN itself was founded from the ashes of that destruction. But let me be honest with you. Today, remembrance alone is not enough, because while we remember, Jews are attacked. While we speak, hatred spreads. Words, slogans, and statements have failed to stop the violence. I stand before you as Israel's ambassador to sound the alarm. The time for talk is over. The time for action is now. In recent years, we have heard many warnings from this podium about the rise of anti-Semitism, about dangerous lies, about how hatred begins with language. Those warnings are right, but they ring hollow when the lies that fuel anti-Semitism are allowed to spread, including here, in this building, in the UN. When false narratives are repeated in this chamber, they do not stay here. They spread across the world with the rubber stamp of the UN. They harden into belief, they turn into hatred. To my fellow ambassadors here today, when you return to your missions later this afternoon, please ask for the numbers. How many anti-Semitic incidents were reported in the past year in your country? How many threats? How many attacks? Then ask the harder questions. How many indictments? How many prosecutions? How many convictions? When you see that gap, do not explain it away. That gap is a measure of failure. It is a space where hatred grows. It is not enough to come here once a year to speak about remembrance and then go home and allow the same hatred to spread unchecked. Remembrance without action is empty. Later today, you will hear from a brave Holocaust survivor, Sarah Weinstein. Sarah, thank you for coming from Israel to being with us. Sarah was just a little girl when the Nazis forced her and her family into a ghetto in July 1941. She survived hunger, fear, and miserable conditions, all because she was Jewish. In late 1942, her family was hidden by a local family who risked everything. Then, a village mob, fueled by anti-Jew hatred, arrived. Shots were fired. Chaos followed. As bullets tore through the room, Sarah's mother threw herself on top of her, using her body as a shield. Her mother was killed protecting her daughter. We wish this were only a memory from the Holocaust. It is not. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists crossed into Israel. They went house to house. They hunted families. They murdered parents in front of their children. 16-year-old Rotem Matthias survived because his parents died protecting him. As terrorists stormed his home, Rotem lay completely still beneath his mother's body. Deborah Matthias, was shot and killed by Hamas terrorists. Her lifeless body lay on top of Rotem for hours. Those scenes were not imagined. They were recorded. They were celebrated. Hamas did not invent hatred of Jews. It has revived it with new weapons and new slogans. Their goal is not borders or compromise. It is extermination. The threat is modern. The hatred is not. Again, today, Jews are forced to use their own bodies to protect those they love. That is the reality we are confronting today. This violence does not stop at Israel's borders. Last month, on Bondi Beach in Australia, Alexander Kleitman and his wife Larissa stood together at a Hanukkah celebration. Both were Holocaust survivors. When terrorists opened fire on the Jews gathered there, Alexander did what Sarah's mother had done in 1942. What Rotem's mom had done on October 7th. He shielded his wife with his body. He was 87 years old. He was murdered protecting his wife. Around them, others did the same. People scrambled to cover children. What we saw was horrific and tragically familiar. This was another massacre targeting Jews. This is not memory. This is now. Bondi was not an isolated act. It followed October 7th, the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It followed synagogue fire bombings. It followed shootings and deadly attacks from Manchester to Washington, from Paris to Sydney. This is not a coincidence. Hatred that begins with words does not remain words. It spreads and it kills. Anti-Semitism did not end in 1945. It adapted. Today, it often hides behind hostility to Israel. We hear it in chants to globalize the Intifada. We see it in calls to boycott Israel. We see it on college campuses where Jewish students are harassed, excluded, and intimidated. This is not protest. This is not free speech. This has a name. The name is anti-Semitism. Targeted violence does not begin with graves. It begins with dehumanization. That is the lesson of the Holocaust. Hatred does not spread on its own. It is enabled. It is legitimized. It is given authority. Especially over the last 2 years, this institution, the UN, has failed that test. We have all seen it. Claims of genocide. A claim made by a senior UN official that 14,000 babies would die within 48 hours. That claim did not come from the fringe. It came from the heart of the UN. It was made without evidence. It was repeated without correction. It traveled the world, stamped with UN credibility. It has consequences. It inflamed hatred. It legitimized lies. It put a target on Jewish communities around the world. Hamas came with the same hatred and the same intent as the Nazis, to murder Jews, terrorize families, and erase entire communities. They slaughtered 1,200 innocent people. They beheaded them. They raped women. They burned children alive. More than 250 people were taken hostage. But unlike 1941, today there is a different reality. We crushed and stopped Hamas's terror machine. We brought home every hostage, every single one of them. We waited 843 days. Today, the pin finally comes off. We have shown that the Jewish people are no longer defenseless. Today, we have our own army, the soldiers of the IDF. The days when Jews are massacred without response are over. Yet, from October 8th, while we were still counting our dead and pushing back terrorists, we faced relentless condemnation from within this institution. Hypocrisy, bias. The campaign against Israel started while Israelis were still being hunted. But despite the double standards, despite the pressure, we stood tall. Our brave IDF soldiers, my son, my daughter, our children, stood up and stepped forward to defend our people. They are the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors and of the founders of our nation, now standing proud to ensure Jewish survival. I stand here and thank our heroes who fought like lions, with determination, with resilience, with bravery. To our brave soldiers, I say this: we honor your courage. We admire your sacrifice. We salute you. Thanks to you, every Jew feels safer today. To my fellow ambassadors, the responsibility now turns to you and to your governments. Standing with Israel does not mean agreeing with us on everything. It means standing against terror. It means confronting hatred before it turns violent. It means refusing to tolerate incitement in your streets, on your campuses, and online. It means showing real leadership, because too many in this building have buckled. They buckled under the pressure of biased media, false propaganda, and anti-Semitic campaigns. Do not repeat that failure. Do not surrender moral clarity for political gain. Do not wait until words turn into blood. Never again demands action. Not tomorrow, not in a year. Never again is now. Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador Danon. I would now like to invite His Excellency Mr. Michael Waltz, Permanent Representative of the United States, to deliver his remarks.
Ambassador Danon, thank you for those incredibly powerful words. Excellencies, survivors, friends, today the United States of America joins the international community in honoring the memory of those 6 million Jews murdered in cold blood in the Holocaust, including 1.5 million innocent children, and the millions more who were persecuted and killed by the Nazi regime. We remember them, we mourn them, and we recommit ourselves with fierce determination to pursue justice for the victims, for the survivors, and their families. We, the United States, we, the international community, must remain unyielding, unapologetically committed to combating anti-Semitism, not just in the United States, but around the world, including right here at the United Nations, the very institution that was born from the ashes of World War II, where the world then vowed never again. Well, colleagues and excellencies, I have tragic and sad news for you that it is happening again. The UN must do far more now to confront this ancient poison, to fulfill its founding promise, and to protect every people, including the Jewish people. As a soldier myself, I'm proud to